Well, look at we're all of a certain age. I mean, I can remember the Maple Leafs being the team of the 1960s in the four Stanley Cups. That's 60 years ago almost.
Yeah.
You mentioned 93, Patrick Waugh, the Montreal Canadiens. That's 30 years ago. There's a
Yeah.
whole entire generation of hockey fans that, and the players of the Montreal Canadiens today. I mean, do you really think they have any idea who the Montreal Canadiens were in the 1950s and 1960s? I mean, really? I mean, historically, you can look it up, but they really don't have a sense of what hockey was to Montreal. That the Stanley Cup was almost given to the Montreal Canadiens on an annual basis for a period of what, 10, 15 years.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
does that
famously the
exist?
mayor. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Bob. I don't think they do. I don't, and that's not a knock on them. I mean, there's some
No,
fans
I'm not
who, or
knocking them.
some,
I'm just
yeah,
saying
no,
there's no
you're right.
carryover to today
You're
at
completely
this
right.
point.
And, if today's Montreal Canadian can skate out onto the Bell Center ice and they can look up at the banners and they can see all these banners that are hanging there and they can look around the dressing room and see all the Hall of Famers pictures and they can see the plaques of the champions who've been
Sure.
there before. But I mean, those are sort of the tangible reminders of what the greatness of this organization was. But it's a different NHL, right? I mean, Jean Drapeau, the Montreal mayor, famously, of course, issued that press release, and he didn't mean to be snarky or snide about it. He just said the Montreal Canadiens Stanley Cup parade will follow the usual route. I mean, you knew what lamppost you were going to be
Exactly. Yeah.
hanging from, right? When you in the late 70s, it was that run of four straight. You knew what day you were cutting class, and your teacher fully expected you to cut class.
Okay, so that you've led us to the point where we could talk about what I view as the greatest team ever to play the game, period. And that was Scotty's team of 76, 77, where they had 8 regular season losses. And people have been raving this year about the Boston Bruins, how great the Bruins are, and how many points the Bruins are going to have. And the Bruins will probably surpass 132 points, to have more points than any other team in a regular season. And I know we can't compare them, but it kind of irks me every time we talk how great the Bruins are. And then you look at what Scotty's team was, full of all those Hall of Famers.
There were 9 Hall of Famers on that team. I brought some crib notes, so forgive me if I'm looking down because there's so many numbers. Scotty Bowman would remember all his stuff in his sleep, but I don't. In 2017, the National Hockey League, as part of our centennial year, did a fan poll to choose the top 10 teams of all time. The number one team would have been the Edmonton Oilers of, let's see, they were 84-85. And then the 91-92 Penguins were number 2. And Scotty's 76-77 Canadiens are ranked number 3. And I was in Nashville, the Stanley Cup final, when this was announced. And about 6 o'clock in the morning, my phone rings. I look over, I see Scotty Bowman. I'm thinking, uh-oh, what's this? And I answer the phone. Scotty doesn't even say hello. He just says, well, I guess we should have lost none. And then he hangs up. And not that Scotty took it personally, right? So I waited. I said, I'm not going to call him back. I'll just let him simmer down a bit. 2 hours later, he phoned back and we talked. But I mean, you look through this team. At one point, the Penguins teams were ranked 1, 2, 3, 4 in this poll. The goal differential the Canadiens had that year was 216. That was 33 more goals than the Detroit Red Wings scored as a franchise that year, right? The Canadiens had 387 goals for. That was 75 more than the number 2 Bruins. They had 171 goals against, 42 fewer than number 2 Philly. Dryden and Larocque won the Vezina. Lafleur won the Hart. Art Ross, Conn Smythe. Steve Shutt led the league in goals with 60. The Habs swept the Blues in the quarters, beat the Islanders in a 6-game semi, swept the Bruins in the semifinal. Cournoyer told me, and I still laugh about this, Ivan was captain then. It was his second year of being captain of the team. And he said, every time we lost 2 in a row, I took the boys out to lunch and tried to settle things down. And I said, Ivan, you never lost 2 in a row. And he said, well, I guess I didn't spend much money then, did I? So, I mean, the Roadrunner still laughs about that. But the team, they lost 1 game at home. They lost to the Boston Bruins on the 30th of October that year. I don't know how many 1-goal games they had, but the defenseman, and here's one of the great Scotty Bowman stories. Guy Lapointe still to this day, still calls him the computer. We're in conversation about this hockey team. Scotty's in his car, so it's not like he has notes in front of him. He says, my defenseman scored 63 goals that year, and they would have had 64 if John Van Boxmeer hadn't hit the goalpost in the second period. About, whoa, Scotty, hold the phone. Wait a minute. What are you talking about? He said, Van Boxmeer hit the goalpost in this game. So I said, okay, hang on. And I have access to a lot of deep files. And I looked it up. And there's John Van Boxmeer hitting the goalpost. And John Van Boxmeer had no goals that season. So that's Scotty, right? I mean, Scotty is just, he's a human encyclopedia. He will forget more about the game of hockey than all of us and any other historian will ever remember. But in my mind, there is no contest. I mean, that is the greatest hockey team that has ever been assembled, the greatest club team that's ever been assembled. The fact that that team did what they did and that there were so many characters on that team. I mean, Larry Robinson has famously said, we practiced guilty, because these guys loved life, and they had the city of Montreal rolled out at their feet with a giant red carpet. They could go anywhere they wanted. In those days, if a guy had too much to drink, you didn't have to worry about someone with a camera phone taking a picture of you. You had the Montreal police saying, "Hey, get in the car. I'll drive you home, and I'll have my partner here drive your car home." And that's what they did. I mean, the Canadiens owned this city. But that hockey team, that 68-11 team, is the greatest hockey team that's ever been put together, that's ever played, and that's the hill on which I will die.